butternut squash and apple soup. The ingredients might sound a little surprising to you, but I have to say I've taught this in multiple different contexts, and I've had it compared against multiple different dishes, even recently among my patients at a party, and this was actually the favorite of the entire group. So I'd highly recommend this dish, even if things might not seem like items you would necessarily combine. So I'm going to go ahead and start heating up my pot. And while that heats up, I should also mention, similar to the chili, this is a super high fiber dish. You're getting lots of different nutrients from the apples. We're doing butternut squash. We're doing sweet potatoes. So it's quite simple. It'll be seasoned with some lemon, adjusted for sweetness, have some salt. And then when I do the seasoning, I'm going to use some curry powder. But this is actually a really flexible dish. So if you'd rather have more of an Italian type flavor, you could leave that out. You could chop up some fresh basil and sprinkle that on top. You could use Italian seasoning, you could use chili powder, you could use really any fresh herbs like thyme, rosemary, anything like that would be really delicious in here. So it's, the world is your oyster. You can make it however you want. So I'm going to put some olive oil in my pan here. All right. And if anyone's not used to using an induction, it's cooked up. Anytime it loses contact with the metal pots, it will beep. So if you get one and you're wondering why it's beeping all the time, that's why. We're going to go ahead and saute our onions in the oil first. And here's where you could do a few variations too. If you want it to be like a nice, sweet, mellow soup, you want to make sure to avoid browning the onions. So you just want to help them to become a bit translucent, to get soft. You don't have to worry too much about the size of anything is chopped. We're going to blend this soup. It's going to be a nice creamy soup at the end. So if you're practicing your knife skills, being really careful to make everything perfect, this is not the recipe you need to do that with. I'm going to add a little pinch of salt. And then another thing that's versatile with this recipe is I'm going to use some vegetable stock. You could use water just as easily. You could use chicken stock. They all give a slight variation in flavor. And if you're using a prepared stock or bouillon, they tend to be quite salty, so you might not want to add much in cooking. To make a homemade stock from scratch that doesn't have salt, you're going to be using more. So you can kind of use the amount of salt in the recipe listed. It really, not even as a guideline, just taste frequently, see what you need to add. The easiest way to learn how to salt properly is to do it when you're making a soup or a stew or some kind of sauce. So something that's creamy, and it will allow you to easily taste slight differences in salting. So if you have something that's unsalted, you could add a little bit. Let's say we have all of our liquid in the pot, add a little bit. And then you want to taste, before it's salted, where on your tongue you can taste the most intense flavor. If it's mostly at the tip of your tongue, it means there's probably not very much salt in it. You add another pinch or so and keep doing that, stirring and then tasting after each pinch, you'll notice that it will kind of march back on your tongue. And then once it's properly salted, you will taste the flavor on your whole tongue all the way to the back of your tongue. And that's where you would stop adding salt, because you don't have taste buds in your throat. And any additional salt's not going to convey any additional flavor. So that's where you're getting, potentially negative health consequences with a zero added benefit. If you do that, you're having a lot less salt in your food that you cook at home. You may notice that when you go out to eat at restaurants, you get fast food, you get prepared things that come in boxes and bags that are very overly salted, partly to preserve them. You'll notice you get like a dryness in your throat. You have to reach for a drink, something that's refreshing, and that's because there's so much salt. It's like drying out your throat. And again, that's not adding any flavor. It's just to preserve the food. And then I added oil to saute the onions. You could, again, just double the amount and use stock instead if you want to make it quite a low-calorie soup. If you want it to be substantial, since it's going to be a creamy soup without any cream, you can use more. You could use, really, you can use a nut-based creamer or something if you want it creamy, but you don't want to use the oil. There's a lot of ways that you can adapt this recipe. All right, our onions are starting to get translucent. So just like we have previously, we're going to bloom our spices. We're going to use our curry powder, put that in. I give a few variations for different spice mixes that are similar to curry powder, like Ras El Hanout. You could use garam masala. Those are variations that are kind of in the realm of something that would taste like curry powder. It's going to give us even a nice bright yellower color than we would have even with our other ingredients. Then we'll add the rest of our vegetables. We have some butternut squash, some sweet potato, and again, some green apple. We're going to blend this, so, no need to peel it, leave the skins on. There's a lot of good nutrition and fiber in the skins and right under the skins. All right, where she could smell that blooming curry powder. It smells so good. All right, I'm going to dump my stock in here. Okay. And so now we're kind of at the waiting stage. So we're going to bring this to a boil, turn it down to a simmer, let it simmer for 20 to 30 minutes. It really depends on the size that everything is chopped up. Bigger pieces take longer, smaller pieces cook faster. You want everything to be fork tender, so it's just easy to push a fork in to. Then I would test, make sure you test a couple sweet potato pieces, a couple butternut squash pieces. An apple will cook quicker than the other two, so that's usually done by the time those are nearing being done. And then once those are tender, we'll put it in a blender. I'll show you that step. And that's when we're going to adjust the seasoning. So I'm going to save the little bit of agave syrup here I have. You could just as easily use brown or white sugar, or really anything sweet. Just trying to showcase a variety of sweeteners in the class here. And then we're going to add some lemon. Before I add any more salt to this dish, I'm going to add the lemon juice until I have a real nice lemon zing, or whatever degree of lemon zing you want in there, and then I'll add the salt. Adding the acid first really, as I'm going to mention over and over again in this class, is going to help reduce the amount of salt that you need to put into any dish. And again, if it's very sweet, I'm probably not going to add all the agave. If the curry powder had a nice spice, I might not add the cayenne. So it's really just to adjust it how you like. And so now our pot is coming up to pretty much at a simmer. Again, we're going to let it get up to a boil, which will just take a few more seconds. Then I'll turn it down and let it go until everything is fork tender. Really bubbling now, so time to. All right, you want it going just about like that until it's tender, and then we'll go ahead and blend it. Now our butternut squash and apple soup is fully simmered, and so I just want to show you what it needs to check for it being fork tender. So I have my fork, and I'm just going to poke it into an apple. The apple's basically disintegrating, it's very tender. What usually takes longer is the butternut squash, the sweet potato. Yeah, you don't even feel yourself poking into it. It just goes right through. So very tender. There's really not any way that you can overcook it. Undercooking it tastes worse. Overcooking it, as long as it's not burning to the bottom of the pot, you're totally fine. It's very not fussy. So we're going to blend it, and then we're going to adjust the seasoning. So when I do this, I'm going to pour away from me. So you always want to pour hot things, especially with chunks in them, which will splatter away from you. Okay. This blender I know seals really well. If you have a regular home blender, you will want to make sure not to fill it more than half full, because the pressure that is released when you blend something hot can force the lid up and you can get a burn. So I'm going to clip this on. I'm also going to hold it on so it can't do that, and then we'll go ahead and blend it. You always want to start on low. It will prevent that risk of splashing. And then I'm just increasing the speed to get it smoother. And I think we're pretty much there, so I'm going to take this lid off. And if you do have a smaller blender or a different kind of blender, you just do it in 2 batches, just to be safe. You just want it really rich and creamy. There shouldn't be any chunks left. And so hopefully you can see how just beautiful, bright, and sunny this is. It's really going to brighten up a cold day. And now I'm going to pour it back into the soup pot, and then we'll season it. Make sure to pour away from you. It's not as likely to splatter now that it's smooth, though. Always taste first.
It's actually pretty well salted. I don't think I need to add any more salt. I can taste it all the way back on my tongue. This is not the sweetest of the butternut squashes I've had, so I am going to add just like the tiniest bit of agave syrup to this. And then it could use just a tiny bit more spice, so I'm going to add that pinch of cayenne in there. And then I'm going to add a squeeze of lemon as well. And again, if I did feel like I needed more salt, I'd add the lemon before I added the salt. I'm just holding my fingers here to catch any seeds that come out of the lemon when I squeeze it, like my own portable sieve. All right, start with half the lemon. You can always come back and add more. And if you wanted to have a thicker version of the soup, you could also, when you simmer it, you could, instead of putting a lid on it, make sure to leave the lid off. Some of that liquid will bubble away and it'll be a thicker soup. So that's an easy way to make that adjustment without really doing much different. It's like a totally different soup. Adding that lemon, it really just brings a lot more flavor to it. I'm gonna add just a little bit more lemon. Catch those seeds. I don't think I need this whole other half, just a little bit more, teaspoon or so. So I've grabbed a couple of other ingredients here to show you one way to garnish this. It's nice when you have a pureed soup where it's really hard to tell what's in there to use some ingredients that might be in it already to give a nod to some of them. I grabbed some cumin, which is in the curry powder. You could also use a little bit of the leftover cayenne pepper. I'm going to use some olive oil and some pepper, and I'll show you how to garnish that. If you wanted to add some color, some cilantro would go well with this. I'm going to skip that for now because, again, I'm just going to highlight the flavors that are already in the dish. Have our beautiful soup there. And I like to do, there's some olive oil in there, just do a little drizzle of olive oil on the top. And it will kind of float there because it's a little bit less dense than the soup itself. If you have a nice flavored olive oil, like a basil flavored olive oil or herb flavored olive oil, or something a little spicy like a chili olive oil, that would be really good. Then I'm just going to put, if you start up here and sprinkle any ground spices, then they'll not clump up and they'll float on top. I'll do a little bit with the cayenne to give it a little spice. You really don't want to go too crazy with cayenne if you do this. It's kind of nice to add that little bit of red. And then I might do some coarser ground black pepper on top. I guess I'm craving some green. Maybe I will put a little bit of cilantro on there, but you could put a few little cilantro pieces there. You could also just put a couple whole leaves on there would be really beautiful. They just sit right on top. So here's our butternut squash and apple soup.